Welcome to Breaking the Standard, where we are closing the communication and knowledge gap for the small business government contracting industry. I'm Aubrey Gainford, and today we have very special guest Brian Lindholm with us. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
If you could just introduce yourself for our listeners, that would be great.
That'd be no problem. So yeah, I'm Brian Lindholm. I'm the managing principal, owner, founder, etc. for my small business, Fed Savvy Strategies. I've been in the government contracting game for arguably too damn long, 25 years plus, in a variety of business development, capture, proposal, but really for the last 15 plus years, been exclusively focused on doing market and competitive intelligence work.
So I had the opportunity to meet Brian at a panel that we got to both be on a couple weeks ago. And I can honestly say, I think Brian is one of the smartest people that I've met in terms of data and like finding out different like trends and how things work. And I'm learning all of these other parts of, GovCon that I didn't even know existed. So, but part of that conversation led us to what we're going to be talking about today. And so today we're going to be talking about the sin or misconception that incumbency doesn't guarantee a win. And so I guess probably I always try to not assume that everybody knows what this word means. So can you explain what incumbency means for someone who might not be as well versed in contracting?
Sure, no problem. And thank you for the kind words. The respect is mutual. You were a delight to talk with a lot of nerdy GovCon topics. So I appreciate that a lot. I really do. So on the topic of incumbency, what is incumbency? So incumbency, very simply put, is the business that has the contract that's at stake. They've got it right now. They're performing the work right now for whoever their U.S. government customer is.
And how would you say that, in your opinion, I guess, how does incumbency impact or come into play when that said contract is being recompeted?
Yeah, well, that can manifest in a lot of ways. So we maybe talk about this for quite some time, right? So that this can come into, of course, ideally the incumbent, they know the agency's mission inside and out if they're doing their job appropriately, hopefully. They may also be able to influence or steer the customer, that U.S. government customer, to coach them on things they would like to see in the next RFP that obviously will favor them. Otherwise, they would not bother to steer anything. But beyond that, I mean, they really should know the nuance of the work that sometimes is difficult to discern by reading an RFP, because many RFPs are so broadly written that it's hard to understand kind of the wink, wink, nudge, nudge, what's really happening inside that work, the agency, their mission, but also where they're going. And certainly, you'd like to believe that if that incumbent is there, they actually know the nature of specific risks of performing the work where things can go horribly wrong. So to keep ahead of it, they'll understand, which this becomes a very big advantage many times over. They may understand at a very high level of detail the technology stack that's being used in the work in the environment of the agency, which can give them huge advantages to know how they interact with each other, what might be becoming obsolete, what needs to change. They'll understand the risk profile for that customer, that government agency, especially around staffing and expectations for staffing. Do I want to have a heavy senior workforce versus maybe a blended workforce of high, medium, and low levels of experience? They'll understand budget challenges and pricing pressures. So those are gigantic advantages that an incumbent should have. Of course, you can always overcome those through doing good capture and business development work or doing your homework. But frankly, I made a comment briefly about the shaping. You can sometimes see that shaping manifest in how the RFP looks. Is the RFP restrictive? Let's say with lots of key personnel with various specific requirements. But there's so many advantages that an incumbent can use to win, but it's not as formidable of an advantage as it used to be, but it should be if you're using it properly.
And I am curious what your thoughts are on this, but I think people make the assumption that because you're an incumbent, you're necessarily automatically set up and guaranteed to win or, receive an award. And I have to say, I don't agree with that. I think that
Right.
that's not the case. And so I'm really curious to hear. A lot of times I think it's because they commit a sin or they make some
Sure.
mistake that cost them, the opportunity to re-win that contract. And so I love all of the things that you find out about this stuff. So I'm really curious to hear, like, what are some of the things that you've seen that incumbents have done that have cost them, re-winning a contract they already had.
Oh boy. That's a long, long list of sins that are committed. I mean, right. I think, but the premise of the incumbent having a lock on it. I will tell you that earlier in my career, when I first came into this business, incumbents did. They really did. I mean, if you were an incumbent, you could expect a win rate around 75, 80, 85%, right? It was almost unheard of for an incumbent to lose, even if, by the way, the incumbent was maybe not blowing the socks off of the customer, because I think there was a lot of reluctance to switch. If you look at the trend of how incumbents continue to lose more and more, I think that part of it is that the customers, the agencies, are more willing to assess, able to assess risk of switching and being willing to switch, and not being really, frankly, to be the personal ATM for a business who may be performing so or even poorly, which I think is great, because it does create and foster competition. So on the topic though of the sins that they commit, oh boy, gosh, that's where do we start with that? And sins can be including, which I just laugh when I read things like protests, where you see an incumbent who lost, and a lot of protests will feature an incumbent who just got crushed. That they simply are not. The biggest thing that they often screw up on is they're not leaning forward. So what do I mean by that? Leaning forward in terms of, yes, and you had a contract, even if your CPARs are great on the current contract, that means diddly going forward, because the next scope, it might be radically different.
Mm.
Missions don't static, they change, they evolve, they have to evolve by the nature of environmental factors, budget constraints, whatever it is, doesn't matter. But that complacency of, oh, they're just going to do a copy paste job of the old RFP to the new one. Well, okay. That's strike 1, 2, and 3 if you think that's going to happen. Those things will change. And also then assuming that it becomes obvious of, well, our incumbent experience should score a strength. Your incumbent experience is not going to score a strength. Your solution might score strengths, but to be complacent and not reinvent yourself, maybe not radically reinvent yourself, but be mindful about what's being asked and not respond to the RFP in a manner that is going to address the new requirements. I've seen plenty of incumbents just get crushed on that basis alone, which is just like, you know what, you lost, and frankly, you should have lost. I will shed no tears for you because of your complacency. And just even assuming they should get strength by being the incumbent, just stating it outright, I should get strength because I'm the incumbent. That doesn't mean anything. So it's really the arrogance, the hubris that the incumbents have. They get themselves in trouble, or someone comes into the competition with a fundamentally creative way of solving a problem. I've seen a lot of creativity around staffing and how they can staff to drive down costs, or to reimagine how the staff configuration and layout should be, how a management team should be more matrixed and more flexible and not rigidly hierarchical, to have more agility in responding to tasks.
Mhm.
These are some of the ways that challengers absolutely have crushed incumbents, and it's not always a pricing game. In fact, the pricing is not usually the defining factor. It's around the solution that is presented that will help them earn strengths, and therefore they will win. So these are just a few examples of how incumbents have just gotten absolutely smashed to bits, and often it's just a matter of pure hubris.
I'm so glad that you mentioned about, just saying I'm an incumbent that should give me something, because I think companies forget or lose sight of the fact. And if you're new to the government contracting realm, when you're being evaluated for something, you're being evaluated solely on what you've provided in response to the solicitation.
Right.
If the government pulls in anything outside of that, then they did not follow the procedure of the solicitation, and that can be protested.
Mhm.
So even if you're my incumbent and I don't like you, or I'm not a huge fan of you, but you're doing a great job, I can't use my personal opinion or bias of what you did last Tuesday. I have to look at what you gave me. Did you meet everything? Did you address something? Did you offer something over the top? And but I have seen what you shared, that they thought they were a shoo-in, and then they didn't, they like phoned it in. It's like,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That happens, and that happens a lot. That gets featured quite a lot. And you can just read, pick a protest at random, and very often it's going to be some incumbent who lost. And they did so because they were not reading the mail. They were not paying attention to what was being asked. And it's a tough role to be in. I mean, I feel for incumbents because you got the target on your back. And you're right, at that point in time, you may feel, and maybe appropriately feeling, constrained
mhm,
by what you know, and constrained, frankly, by if I change something too radically, then the customer's going to wonder, well, where the hell have you been for 5 years if this is what you can do now?
right.
I deal with this in our black hat strategy reviews all the time, where we've got an incumbent. Well, how do I reinvent myself to add value without making it look like I'm trying to be someone that I haven't been for 5 years? It's a tough position to be in, and people think that that's the catbird seat, but more and more now, it's really it's a stressful situation because you're expected to win inside the company, but you have a lot of forces working against you that don't make it quite so easy to do. And the guys who are coming in, they do have more room to maneuver. They fundamentally do. They have less constraints. They have more room to maneuver, and they're expected to be maneuvering more. And again, if you are just completely reinventing your solution as the incumbent, and something hasn't drastically changed, if I was the government, I'd be wondering, well, who are you guys now?
Mhm,
This is strange, but
mhm.
that's just an opinion.
So, what would your recommendations be for companies to do to avoid these pitfalls, or, quote unquote sins? Like, I mean, things happen, and it's a
Sure.
learning experience if they do this, like we've talked about before. Protests are a great way for companies to learn. If you lose, like, and you lose your protest, you can take this back and be able to apply it for next time. But
Mhm.
I guess if you were to say things that they could think about now as like, do not do this, or things you should really take into consideration now, like what would that be?
Yeah. There's a lot of course, the majority of the contracts out there are service oriented, and in those service oriented ones, there's often some very specific requirements for key personnel. Um, Certainly, as an incumbent, you want to make some suggestions to the customer about what those key personnel mix should look like. But if you see an RFP and your incumbent staff can't meet the requirements, well, don't bid them.
Mm,
I mean, that's going to be difficult to do that. Essentially, you're essentially letting people go who've been serving you ideally faithfully for a long time. But if they can't meet the requirements, I'm going to sneak them in there. You're going to have to reinvent yourself. That also could be, frankly, a tell that they're just not that into you, and you're about to lose anyway. So that's a part of it, and the leveraging their knowledge of the mission space is actually often a strength that usually gets scored as a strength to demonstrate you understand how things work, how to shape your business processes to adapt to that. Because it's not like there's a case of sometimes the tail is not going to wag the dog, right? The dog is the agency, you're the tail. You're not telling the dog what to do. You're trying to adapt to it. So that's an important part of making sure that your approach to staffing, your approach to management has to fit that changing norm. If there's an expectation that we need to do more focus on agile, we better damn well better adapt to it. If there is some planned technology modernization event, whether you're a part of it directly or indirectly, then you better darn well make sure that your staff or you have a partner who can help you understand that new technology stack so you can adapt to it. Um, gosh, there's so many things to cover here. I feel like I'm sure I'm forgetting something here. But frankly, also being creative with you may actually suggest some of your own key personnel you just add. Because I know this position, even though it's not requested or required, it adds value. And let me explain to you how it adds value.
Mhm.
And beyond that, you may have people that are wildly experienced. Um, if you propose those folks and they are well above the key personnel requirements or staffing requirements, that may be great, but don't assume that's going to be perceived as a strength. You better explain that, hey, Bob Schmuckatelli here is a PM with 3 certifications and 30 years of experience, and your requirements was a PMP and 5 years and a bachelor's. Well, here's why Bob is a risk mitigator for your performance, and spell it out. Detail. This is why you want Bob back. If you don't do that, then it won't be evaluated. They may read into it, but I wouldn't count on it. I'd much prefer to control my own destiny and say, here's why you want this, and spell it out for them, because that will certainly help them do an evaluation and, by the way, write their justification for the award. If you can spell out for them the enumerated numbers of benefits of why a tool you have or a person you have is going to help them. That's critical, because you can't assume that it's going to be obvious. And certainly proposing tools that are radically different or have IP or data rights issues, you're gonna get crushed, or don't have an authority to operate on the customer's network. Don't even bother. What are you doing? You're living in a dreamland, because it
Mhm.
won't be accepted. So there's so many things to do, but I've seen plenty of incumbents who they look at the RFP, go, yeah, we're not going to do that anyway, and respond to something differently. No, this is. I actually had a client of mine who had a $500 million recompete. They almost lost
Mm.
because the evaluation criteria switched up in a way that they didn't expect. They had to adapt quickly. They won, good on them, which is great, but they almost missed the field goal because they weren't paying attention to the RFP, that the customer's expectations had shifted. And they were not going to evaluate them based on the typical criteria that they had expected to see for the 2 years of the recompete strategy.
Yeah, you've said so many key things, and I think it's important to note, like just like we said with the government evaluating what they're given, you can't assume that the government, whoever's reviewing your proposal, is going to know you from vendor A, B, or C. So, like you said, and we've talked about this, at nauseum before, but you have to be able to explain to your customer or your potential customer
Mhm.
why what you have is going to be great for the agency and for your requirement, and then even offer something that they didn't know that they needed or wanted. And otherwise, you can't make the assumption that just because you know it's important and adds value, that the person reading it is going to understand that it adds value. And
Right.
so, but I mean, it's just there's so many things, and please read the solicitation. Like, read the solicitation frontwards, backwards, ask questions, make sure that you understand and don't make assumptions that you know already what they're talking about because you've been supporting this contract for the last 5 years. Um,
Right.
so I ask these same two questions to everybody that I have on the show. If you were to give any advice to the small business government contracting industry and companies that either are already in it or want to get into it, what would you say to them?
A couple things, really, where I see businesses go horribly awry when they do their bids. I mean, the first thing first is focus on what many refer to as strength-based winning.
Hmm.
So when you focus on that, what does that mean? So your proposal should focus on solutions that are scoreable as strengths, and they're clearly stated as, here's the benefit that you get from what I'm offering you. This goes back to the whole idea about do not assume that the reader will interpret what you are saying and the way you want them to interpret it. You must be explicit, and you must focus on strengths. I know even when I do my own competitive intelligence work, I do these war game sessions with clients, but I focus on that versus like MBA 101 SWOT nonsense, which is just worthless. For this, it's like, what can score the strength? If it can't score the strength, I don't care, and
Hmm.
nobody's going to care about it. I think realizing that incumbency means nothing in itself unless you can make that manifest in terms of mission knowledge, agency knowledge, environmental knowledge to help shape what you offer to fit what that customer is expecting. To just assume, oh, it's best of breed, industry best practices garbage, or I'm the incumbent, therefore you know me, you're going to lose. You're simply going to lose. It's not scoreable. We're not going to work. Of course, engage that customer early and often as much as you can. If you don't know the walk that they walk, you maybe pull off a Christmas miracle and come in there and win out of the blue. It's happened. I've seen it happen before. I wouldn't count on it though. That's sort of like hoping for a Christmas miracle. That's not likely to happen. Another thing here that I think is really important, that we're getting into sort of price to win territory a little bit here, but it's a very important concept, is understanding the balance of the non-cost factors to the cost factors. Because you can learn this when looking at how an agency typically operates. Some agencies are what I'll call a discount buyer. I don't care what you offer them, they don't care. Like, listen, man, I asked for X, give me X, and stop all the other stuff. Some are actually like, they're like, listen, wow me. If there's something you have that's really interesting, I will consider it and I'll make a true, no kidding, best value trade-off, and I'll be open-minded about it. But to find the balance of the cost and the non-cost part, making sure that you're not trying to make this extravagant solution that costs a lot, unless they're looking for that. And they just want, like when I go buy a car dealer, oh, let me give you this package. Like, dude, I want 4 wheels, I want good gas mileage, I want a reasonably safe car. I'm not going to die if I get into a car wreck. That's it. Those are my criteria. If you can meet those, we're good. If you can't, then I'm going to move on. It's that balance though. And that's a hard balance to achieve and find, but you have to know that customer, what that balance looks like for them, because it's not the same. And then that last part there is understand, are they discount or value minded? If they're discount minded, give them what they ask for exactly. But maybe a couple cool things in there, but don't get fancy. Don't try to show off. Don't try to show off how smart you are, because they don't care. And they're going to be focused more on realism checks anyway. They're looking for risk. The value-minded one are more focused on reasonableness, where you can wow them. But if you don't understand their kind of their bio profile, you're going to be talking a language they don't understand, and you will lose. And you should lose because you didn't do your homework. So those are some initial, some thoughts there, some tips and tidbits for those who are either your newbies or your old pros like me.
And they're all really great. And so if my listeners want to hear more of those, or they want to get in touch with you and ask you questions, what would be the best way to do that?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So easy to check out our website, fedsavvystrategies.com. Or also email me, brian.lindholm, it's LINDHOLM, at fedsavvystrategies.com. I'm pretty responsive on top of messages, or just check out the website. Lots of good content there too to educate you on a number of things. But check us out on the web. We'll give you lots of good free stuff.
And I will make sure to link Brian's information and the website in the show notes. And he also has a blog about sins. So if you ever want to learn more about them, you should just go check them out, because there's a lot of really interesting context behind different things that I don't think people would expect to potentially result the way they do. And there's a lot of explanation behind why. So if you want to have a glass of wine and sit there and read them one day, I think that would be a great way to spend a day. And if you have more questions for me, please email me at breakingthestandard@gmail.com. Make sure to go follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter that just came out, the bulletin, and go connect with us on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, bye.